As many of you know, the day before my recent event in Phoenix with Lawrence Krauss and Matt Dillahunty, a BuzzFeed article dropped alleging all manner of sexual indiscretion against Lawrence, and it was decided literally within a few hours or so that it would be better if Lawrence did not join us for the event in Phoenix. And so at that event, Matt and I made some opening statements about Lawrence's absence and the elephant in the room. About 15 minutes of that discussion leaked on the internet. Someone posted a cell phone video, which cuts off while we're still talking about it. So there's an incomplete record of my views there. So I just want to make sure all of you know what I was thinking and what I am thinking about this. First, some generic things to say. I have known Lawrence for many years. I've been to many conferences with him. I've done a few live events with him. And I have never seen him misbehave. So there was nothing that I ever encountered directly that concerned me. When this BuzzFeed article came out, there were many things that were obvious about it that suggested that we shouldn't rush to accept all of these allegations. First, it was BuzzFeed. It's not to say that BuzzFeed can't break a real story, but BuzzFeed is on the continuum of journalistic integrity and unscrupulousness, somewhere toward the unscrupulous side. I know what it's like to be defamed in journals of that sort, Salon, Alternet. These are not websites that are especially assiduous in how they fact-check. It was also clear from the article that there was a none-too-hidden agenda to deliver a more global attack on the atheist community. There was a link, for instance, alleging my racism, linking to a completely spurious article that was just an exercise in quote mining that Glenn Greenwald put on the Guardian blog. And there were many other indications that this wasn't all about Lawrence. This was yet another attack on atheism and secularism. There were a couple of people cited in the article who I know to be totally unethical, and one is probably a psychopath. These are people who have made it their full-time job to destroy the reputations of prominent atheists. So there are reasons to be cautious in accepting this BuzzFeed piece. But nonetheless, it purported to present the testimony, much of which was anonymous, of many women who claimed to have been victimized to one or another degree by Lawrence. So, on the where there's smoke, there's often fire principle, it is very hard to dismiss something like this. And I didn't dismiss it. But I didn't feel that all of us should be required to render a judgment on it 24 hours later on stage in front of 3,000 people. So, my decision not to share the stage with Lawrence that night was not prejudging the veracity of the piece, but it was based on a sense that there's very likely some truth in it, and that it would be bad for me and Matt to be on stage accepting his blanket denials and then pretending to move on to other topics. We decided it was best that Lawrence not join us. Lawrence, in the end, saw the wisdom of that decision. There was no reason for him to be hostage to the news cycle and have to respond that very night. So we did the event and said a few generic things about the Me Too movement, and then moved on in a way that we wouldn't have been able to had Lawrence been on the stage with us. So, generically, BuzzFeed is terrible. There were certainly signs of bad faith in the article. And it's just a fact that I'm not in a position to judge the truth of such allegations. As I said, I've never seen Lawrence do anything untoward, but the fact that there's this much chatter about how he's behaved is certainly a cause for concern. And I can say in the aftermath of this article, I have since heard from people who have not gone on the record, who did not want to be a source for any public allegation about Lawrence, but who assure me that these kinds of stories are true. So I can offer no defense of Lawrence here. And the only other thing I'll say is that it's highly relevant to me to distinguish gradations of sexual misbehavior. And when I see an article like the one in BuzzFeed that didn't seem inclined to make those distinctions. They talked about actions that were essentially assaults in the same breath as behavior that really was nothing other than an inept attempt to flirt, right? Complimenting somebody in a way that they found undesirable. If you're not going to make those distinctions, it's very hard to take even the serious allegations seriously. So, not knowing the full range of his misbehavior, I really can't offer any defense of Lawrence. But this is something that we have to be very careful about because it is easy to just destroy people's reputations based on mere allegation. And I say this as somebody who has been on the receiving end of this kind of thing, not for anything like sexual harassment, but charges of racism based on my criticism of Islam. Those are everywhere. And if people could have made those stick, they would have. They'll try again tomorrow to do that. I feel very cautious in accepting this kind of thing, but these kinds of allegations are different. These are individual people claiming that another person did certain things to them. That leaves much less scope for delusion and bias than judging whether or not somebody's views are racist, say. So I certainly don't accept everything that's been said about Lawrence at face value, but there's enough there to worry me. And that is not something that I could have said before the BuzzFeed article broke, and it's not something that I could have said on stage that night in Phoenix. But subsequent communication has pushed me into this place. And I'll leave it at that. More generally on the Me Too movement, and this is something I did say in Phoenix, I'm certainly biased toward believing all women who say that a guy was creepy, right? I mean, that is my bias. And I have to correct for that bias in ways so as to give someone a presumption of innocence before more facts are in, which in certain cases is only decent to do. Again, I think it's hugely important to distinguish the ends of the continuum here, the Harvey Weinsteins and Bill Cosbys of the world, from the Louis C.K.'s of the world, from the Aziz Ansari's of the world. I mean, there is a continuum here that stretches from true criminality and rape, right, for which people should spend decades in prison, to sexual and interpersonal pathology that doesn't entail any real coercion of people necessarily, to bad dates and bad flirting and semi-autistic behavior, to just frank misunderstandings. It stretches all the way to cases where, had the guy been desirable to the woman, his behavior would have totally passed as flattery and successful flirting. But because he was undesirable, it was viewed as unwanted attention and in some cases as being classed as a kind of assault or a kind of harassment. I have no idea how single people are going to navigate this space in the workplace and at conferences. This seems now incredibly fraught, and we should all want to find some more adult way to navigate these waters. I'm going to have Bari Weiss, I believe, on the podcast soon. She's written some very intelligent pieces in the New York Times about this. And Rebecca Traister, who's sort of on the other side here, who has said some fairly uncompromising things in favor of Me Too and the more aggressive positions in the movement. She's been invited on the podcast. She knows the door is open. And others, Masha Gessen, Claire Berlinski. But the general principle is there's clearly a spectrum here that we have to recognize. And to not recognize it is to do real injustice. And the injustice is not merely to men who are falsely accused of reprehensible behavior. The injustice is to the women who are the real victims of the most reprehensible behavior. And that behavior is being summarized in the same sentence with truly innocuous misunderstandings. That's not good for anybody. So let's have words mean what they mean. Words like rape and sexual assault and harassment and groping. These words have meanings. And sex you regret is not rape. Two people can consent and still feel that it was a terrible mistake to have done so. Okay, that is its own sort of problem. It's not equivalent at all to the guy who jumps out of the bushes with a knife and rapes you. Let's speak carefully about these things. So anyway, you'll hear more from me as I solicit the opinions of women who are really focused in this area, and those will be their own podcasts. And finally, as to what happens with Lawrence going forward, I can only hope that he makes some appropriate and honest mea culpa. I don't know what form that should take, but saying that it's all lies is almost certainly not going to work for him because it's almost certainly not true. Anyway, I hope he finds some way to redeem himself, and I hope the worst allegations against him are not true. I simply know enough to want to step away from the whole business.